My brother Marcus took everything my grandfather left me. He did it slowly, quietly, and with a smile on his face. And for 10 years, I had nothing but my word against his. Marcus was not just my brother, he was my older brother, the one I looked up to my whole life. He told my family I was greedy. He told them I was unstable. He told them I was lying about what Grandpa had promised me. But Grandpa had done something before he died, something Marcus never found out about. Something that sat quietly in a filing cabinet for 10 years, waiting for exactly the right moment. This is the story of how I got it all back, and how the man who destroyed my reputation ended up on his knees in front of me, begging for help. Stay with me, because this ending is something I could never have planned. I grew up in a house that believed in family above everything. My grandfather, Robert, built that belief from scratch. He came from nothing. He worked in a factory for 30 years. He saved every single dollar he could. By the time I was a teenager, he owned a small rental property and had a retirement account that most people in our neighborhood could only dream about. Grandpa Robert was not a flashy man. He wore the same 3 sweaters every winter. He drove a car that was older than me, but he was the kind of man who remembered every birthday, every graduation, every hard moment in your life. He was the glue of our family. I was his youngest grandchild. I was also the one who sat with him every Sunday afternoon. We watched old westerns together. He taught me how to play chess. He told me stories about his life that he never told anyone else. My brother Marcus was 5 years older than me. He was charming and loud, and everyone loved him immediately. He had this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like he was the most important person there. Our parents adored him. Our aunts and uncles thought he could do no wrong. I never had that kind of shine. I was quieter. I was the one who read books in the corner at family gatherings. I was the one who helped Grandpa wash the dishes after dinner while everyone else was in the living room laughing. Marcus and I were not enemies growing up. We were just different. We had different friends, different hobbies, different ways of being in the world. We were fine. But money changes people. I did not know that then. I was 22 years old and I was about to learn the hardest lesson of my life. Grandpa Robert had a stroke when I was 21. It was not the kind of stroke that kills you right away. It was the kind that slows you down, takes pieces of you, and makes everything harder. For 2 years, he needed more and more help. During those 2 years, I was there. I drove him to his doctor appointments. I helped him with his medications. I sat with him on Sunday afternoons even when he could barely speak. I did not do it for any reward. I did it because I loved him, because he was my grandpa. Marcus visited maybe 4 or 5 times in those 2 years. He was busy. He had a wife now, a woman named Diane, and they had just bought a house. He had excuses every time I called to ask for help. My parents were getting older themselves. My mom had her own health problems. My dad worked long hours. The responsibility of caring for Grandpa fell mostly on me and one of my aunts, Aunt Carol. Grandpa Robert passed away quietly on a Tuesday morning in October. I was at work when I got the call. I left immediately. I held his hand even though he was already gone. I talked to him for a few minutes alone in that room. I told him I loved him. I told him thank you. The funeral was 3 days later. The whole family came. Marcus gave a beautiful speech. Everyone cried, everyone hugged, everyone said how much they would miss Robert. The week after the funeral was when things started to shift. I found out about the will from my Aunt Carol. She called me on a Thursday evening and her voice was strange. She said, "Honey, you should come look at what your grandfather left behind." She did not say anything else. I thought she was just talking about his personal belongings, his sweaters, his chess set, his old photographs. I drove to my parents' house that Saturday. Marcus was already there. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table. There was a folder in the center of the table. I sat down and I looked at my brother, and something in his face told me that whatever was in that folder was not good news for me. The will was short and simple. Grandpa Robert had divided his assets in a straightforward way. His personal belongings went to my parents. The rental property, which was worth around $400,000, was to be split equally among his grandchildren. That meant Marcus and me, $200,000 each. My heart jumped. That was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I was 23 now, working a low-paying job, barely making rent. 200. $1,000 would change everything for me. But then Marcus slid another piece of paper across the table. It was a document I had never seen. He said, "Grandpa updated this about 6 months ago." He said it calmly, like it was nothing important, like it was just paperwork. The document stated that the rental property was now in Marcus's name alone. It said that Grandpa had decided to give Marcus full ownership because Marcus was the more financially responsible grandchild who could properly manage the asset. It said I had been given a small personal sum instead. $5,000. $5,000 against $200,000. I felt something drop in my chest, like a floor giving way. I looked at my brother. I looked at my parents. Nobody would meet my eyes. I asked when Grandpa had signed this document. Marcus said 6 months ago. I said Grandpa had a stroke 8 months ago. I said Grandpa could barely write his own name in those last months. I said something was wrong. Marcus leaned back in his chair. He said, "The document was notarized, it's legal." He said it the way you say something to end a conversation. Final, done, closed. My mom reached across the table and touched my hand. She said, "Honey, maybe Grandpa just felt Marcus could handle it better." She said it gently. She said it the way people say things when they have already decided and they just want you to accept it quietly. I did not accept it quietly. I pushed back from the table. I said something was wrong. I said Grandpa would never have done this. I said Marcus must have done something. I said I wanted to see the original will. I said I wanted to talk to a lawyer. Marcus stood up. His voice did not rise. That was the scariest part. He was perfectly calm. He said, "You are making this into something it is not." He said, "Grandpa loved us both, but he made a choice." He said, "Don't embarrass yourself." My dad did not say a word. He just stared at the table. I drove home that night shaking. I sat in my apartment for 2 hours without moving. I kept thinking about those 2 years I had spent driving Grandpa to his appointments. I kept thinking about every Sunday afternoon. I kept thinking about how Marcus had barely shown up. And now Marcus had everything. I hired a small-time lawyer 3 weeks later. I spent the $5,000 I had inherited on the consultation and the initial filing fees. The lawyer looked at the documents and said it was possible to challenge the update to the will. He said it would depend on proving Grandpa's mental state at the time of signing. But the process was slow and expensive, and Marcus had money. Marcus hired a much bigger law firm. They produced the notary. They produced witnesses. They produced a doctor's note that said Grandpa had been lucid on the day of signing. I had none of that. I had only my memory of a man who could barely hold a pen. The legal challenge dragged on for 14 months. I ran out of money at month 7. The lawyer told me kindly that without more funds, he could not continue. I had to drop the case. And then the worst part happened. Marcus started talking to the family. He told everyone that I had tried to steal from our grandfather's estate. He said I had been manipulating Grandpa during those 2 years I spent caring for him. He said I had probably been trying to get Grandpa to change the will in my favor all along. He said the update to the will was actually Grandpa protecting himself from me. This was the lie that broke me, not the money, the lie. My parents were confused and hurt. They did not know what to believe. My aunts and uncles started treating me differently. At Christmas that year, I sat at the far end of the table and nobody talked to me for most of the dinner. Marcus sat at the center, laughing loudly, refilling everyone's glasses. I moved to a different city the following spring. I needed to start over. I needed to be somewhere nobody knew me as the grandchild who had tried to steal from a dying old man. I got a new job. I made new friends. I built a new life, slowly, from almost nothing. I did not speak to Marcus for 3 years. I sent my parents birthday cards and called them on holidays. But I did not go home. I could not sit in that house and pretend everything was normal. Then, about 5 years after the funeral, Aunt Carol called me. She was the one who had first told me to come look at what Grandpa had left. She was the person in the family who had stayed closest to me even through everything. We talked on the phone a few times a year. She called me on a Sunday evening in March. She said, "I need to tell you something. I have been holding on to it for a while and it is time." She paused. She said, "Come see me." I drove 4 hours to see Aunt Carol the following weekend. She lived in the same small town where I had grown up. She still had the same yellow kitchen with the same yellow curtains that had been tea. Here my whole life. She made coffee and set it on the table, and then she went to the back bedroom. She came back with a large envelope. She placed it on the table between us. She said, "Your grandfather gave this to me about a year before he died, before the stroke, before any of this." She said, "He told me to keep it safe. He told me you would need it someday." She said, "I did not know what was in it until you got sick with all of that legal trouble, and then I opened it, and then I was scared." She put her hands flat on the table. She said, "I am sorry it took me this long." I picked up the envelope. My hands were not completely steady. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter written in my grandfather's handwriting, not the shaky handwriting of his last months. This was his strong, careful handwriting from before the stroke. The letter was dated almost 4 years before he died. The letter was addressed to me by name. He wrote that he loved me. He wrote that he knew I was the one who would show up for him when things got hard. He wrote that he knew the difference between people who stayed and people who only appeared when things were good. He wrote that he wanted to make sure I was taken care of no matter what happened. Then he described something I had never heard of before. He had set up what the letter called an irrevocable trust. He had done it quietly, without telling anyone in the family. The trust held a separate account with a significant amount of money, not the rental property. This was different. This was a savings account he had been building separately for years, in addition to everything else. The trust was in my name alone. It could not be changed. It could not be challenged. He had set it up specifically so that no update to a will, no family dispute, and no legal argument could ever touch it. The amount in the trust was $180,000. Grandpa had done this 4 years before he died, before the stroke, when his mind was fully clear, when he had looked at his family and seen things that I had not yet understood myself. I sat at Aunt Carol's yellow kitchen table, and I read that letter 4 times. I did not cry right away. I was too still for crying. I felt like someone had reached through 10 years of darkness and turned on a small, steady light. Aunt Carol sat across from me and watched me read. She said, "He knew, baby, he always knew." There was also a second document in the envelope. It was the official trust paperwork, signed by Grandpa and a lawyer and a witness. It included the account details and the name of the trust administrator. The administrator was a small law office in the same town, a quiet, careful firm that Grandpa had used for years. I called the law office on Monday morning. The woman who answered the phone had the warm, unhurried voice of someone who had been expecting my call. She said, "We have been waiting to hear from you." She said they had sent letters to an old address of mine. She said they had not been able to reach me. She said the trust was fully intact. She said it had been growing with interest for years. The final amount, with 10 years of interest, was just over $230,000. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you have ever trusted someone completely, given everything you had, and then been left with nothing but a lie, then you already know exactly how this feels. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this. A new one drops every week. Tap the bell so it comes straight to you. I did not call Marcus right away. I did not call my parents. I sat with this information for 2 full weeks. I talked to the trust lawyer. I made sure everything was in order. I made sure the funds could be transferred to me cleanly and legally. I wanted to understand every part of what Grandpa had built before I did anything else. During those 2 weeks, I also thought about what to do with the truth. I had proof now, not just of the trust, but of something bigger. The letter Grandpa wrote made it clear that he had planned ahead because he did not fully trust everyone around him. He had seen something. He had felt something. And he had protected me quietly, without drama, without confrontation, the way he did everything. I thought about confronting Marcus. I thought about showing up at his door with the letter and the documents and watching his face. Part of me wanted that. Part of me had wanted it for 10 years. But I did not do it. Instead, I did something quieter. I transferred the funds into my own account. I paid off my debts. I made a small investment. I breathed for the first time in years without the weight of what had been taken from me pressing down on my chest every single day. Then I wrote an email. I wrote it carefully. I spent 3 days on it. The email was addressed to Marcus, to my parents, to Aunt Carol, and to two of my uncles who had been at the table the day I was cut out of my eye. Inheritance. The email was not angry. It was not dramatic. It was simply true. I explained that Grandpa had set up an irrevocable trust for me before the stroke. I explained that it had been in place for years before his death. I explained that it was now in my possession. I attached scanned copies of the trust document and the letter. I also attached one more thing. It was something Aunt Carol had found in a box of Grandpa's papers. It was a letter Grandpa had written to Aunt Carol, not to me, 2 years before his death. In this letter, he told her that he was worried about Marcus's influence over the family finances. He wrote that he had seen Marcus pressure him during a visit to change some paperwork. He wrote that he had not done it. He wrote that he did not fully trust Marcus with large amounts of money. He had written it down, he had told someone, he had left a record. I sent the email at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. I watched the cursor blink for a long moment. Then I clicked send. Then I turned off my laptop and went to bed and slept better than I had in years. The responses came in the next morning. My mom called before 9. She was crying, not angry crying, sad crying. The kind of crying that sounds like someone who has just understood something they should have understood a long time ago. She said, I am so sorry we did not believe you. She kept saying it. I let her say it. I did not tell her it was fine because it had not been fine, but I told her I loved her and that was true. My dad called an hour later. He did not say much. He said, your grandfather was a smart man. He said, I let you down. That was all. It was enough. My Uncle David called and said he had known something felt wrong at the time, and he was ashamed he had not said so. My Uncle Terence sent a short email that just said he was sorry and that he hoped I was doing well. Marcus did not respond that day. Not that morning, not that afternoon, not that evening. He called 4 days later. His voice was different. The calm confidence was gone. He sounded like someone who had been awake for several nights. He asked if we could talk. I said we were talking. He said he meant in person. I said no. He said, I need you to understand something. I waited. He said, things were very different back then. I was under a lot of pressure with the house and the mortgage, and Diane was pregnant, and I made some choices I am not proud of. He said it all quickly, like he had practiced it, like he thought speed would make it land softer. I said, you told our family I had been manipulating Grandpa. He was quiet. I said, you told them I was trying to steal from him. Still quiet. I said, I lost relationships with people I loved because of what you said. He said, very quietly, I know. That was all I needed to hear. I did not yell. I did not list everything he had done wrong. I did not need to. He knew. He had always known. I told him that I did not want an ongoing legal battle. I told him the trust was mine and there was nothing to fight about. I told him I did not want money from him. I told him I just wanted the truth to be known in our family. He said he would think about it. I said that was his choice. We hung up. I sat very still for a few minutes. Then I made a cup of coffee and went back to work. Now here is the part I did not expect. The part that came 6 months later, almost exactly 10 years after Grandpa died. I got a call from an unknown number on a Friday afternoon. I almost did not answer. But I did. The voice on the other end was a woman. She was crying. She said, is this Marcus's sister? I said yes. She said, this is Diane, please, I need your help. I had met Diane a few times over the years at family events. She was quiet and put together, and I had never had a real conversation with her. I did not know what she could possibly want from me. She told me that Marcus had collapsed at work 2 days earlier. He had been taken to the emergency room. The initial tests had come back, and the doctors had found something serious. She did not say the word, but I understood from how she was speaking that it was the kind of serious that changed a life. She said the medical bills were already impossible. She said their finances were in worse shape than anyone knew. She said Marcus had been living beyond their means for years. She said the rental property he had taken from me had actually been badly mismanaged, and he had sold it years ago at a loss due to his own poor decisions. She said they had nothing left. Then she said the thing that silenced me completely. She said, Marcus needs a bone marrow transplant. The doctors say his best match is a sibling. You are his only sibling. She said, I know what he did to you. I know everything. He told me everything last year when he got sick the first time. I am so sorry. But our children are still small and I am begging you, please just get tested. I sat in my car in a parking lot and stared at the windshield for a long time after that call ended. Let me tell you something true. The first feeling I had was not anger. It was not satisfaction. It was not the feeling of justice I had imagined for 10 years. The first feeling was just grief. Old, deep grief for two people who had once been small children together in the same house. Two grandchildren sitting on either side of an old man watching westerns on a Sunday afternoon. I thought about Grandpa Robert. I thought about his letter. I thought about what kind of man he had been. I thought about whether he would want me to be the kind of person who said no. I thought about it for 3 days. I barely slept. I talked to Aunt Carol. I talked to a therapist I had been seeing for 2 years. I prayed in the way I pray, which is quiet and private. On the 3rd day, I called Diane back. I said I would get tested. I drove to the hospital that same week. I did the blood work. I sat in a waiting room next to strangers, and I filled out paperwork, and I thought about nothing in particular, because thinking too much felt dangerous in that moment. The results came back in less than 2 weeks. I was not a match. When the doctor told me, I felt two things at the same time: relief and disappointment. That combination surprised me. The relief I expected. The disappointment I did not. I did not know until that moment how much some part of me had wanted to be able to give him something. To be the person who showed up even after everything. To prove not to Marcus, but to myself that what had been done to me had not made me into someone smaller. But I was not a match, and that was the truth. I called Diane and told her. She cried. I told her I was sorry. I told her I hoped they found another match quickly. I told her if there was anything else I could do that did not involve my health or money, I was willing to consider it. She thanked me. She sounded exhausted and small and nothing like the confident, polished woman I had briefly known at family dinners. Marcus called me the next day. His voice was thin and tired. He said, "Thank you for getting tested." I said, "Of course." There was a long silence. He said, "I know that wasn't easy for you." I said, "No, it wasn't." Another silence. He said, "I am sorry, Rachel." That was my name. The first time he had said it with no agenda, no defense, just 2 words in his tired voice. I said, "I know you are." I said, "I hope you find a match." I said, "Take care of yourself." And I meant it, not warmly, not coldly, just cleanly, the way you mean something true that you have made peace with. Marcus found a matching donor through the National Registry 4 months later. A stranger. Someone who had signed up years ago and never expected to be called. He had the transplant. It was long and hard, and the recovery was brutal. I know all of this because Aunt Carol kept me updated. I did not speak to Marcus again after that call, but I kept the door open just enough. I stayed in contact with my parents. I visited them the following Thanksgiving for the first time in years. Marcus was not there. He was still recovering. My mom hugged me at the door for a long time. She smelled like the same soap she had always used. I stood in her arms and felt like a child for one small moment. Then I walked inside and sat at the table where so much had happened, and I ate dinner with my parents, and I felt okay. The rental property was gone. Marcus had sold it years ago and spent the money poorly. There was nothing left to recover from him legally, and I did not pursue it. The trust Grandpa had built for me was enough. It had been enough the moment I found out about it. What it gave me was not just money. It gave me back the version of events. It gave me proof that I had not been wrong, that I had not imagined the injustice. That someone who loved me had seen it too and had quietly done something about it before he was gone. There is something I want to say about Grandpa Robert. He was not a dramatic man. He did not make speeches. He did not confront people. He played chess and washed dishes and watched old westerns and worked in a factory for 30 years. But he saw things. He understood people. He knew that what mattered was not what you said, but what you did when it was hard. He had watched Marcus. He had watched me. He had drawn his own conclusions without telling anyone. And then he had gone quietly to a lawyer and he had protected me in the most lasting way he could. Not with words, with paperwork, with something that could not be argued away or manipulated or rewritten. That is what love looked like from him. Legal, quiet, and waiting for me to find it. I have thought a lot about the 10 years between the funeral and the day I found the envelope. I have thought about who I became in those 10 years. I left my hometown. I started over. I built a career on my own without any inheritance to fall back on. I learned how to manage money carefully because I could not afford mistakes. I made friends who knew nothing about my family history and liked me for exactly who I was. I do not think I would have built the same life if I had received the money right away. I do not know. Maybe I would have been fine. But I know that the person who sat in that lawyer's office, making sure everything was in order before telling anyone else, was a more careful, more patient, more sure-footed person than the 23-year-old who had walked away from that kitchen table shaking. Grandpa had watched me become that person. He had believed I would. When I finally visited his grave, a year after finding the envelope, I brought his favorite kind of flowers. Yellow ones. I stood there for a while. I did not say much out loud. But I told him thank you. I told him I understood now why he had planned the way he had. I told him I had used the money well. I told him I was okay. I walked back to my car and I sat for a minute before starting the engine. The sun was going down, and the light was that particular golden color that October evenings have. I thought about him watching westerns. I thought about how he always let me win at chess for about a year before he started playing seriously and beating me fair and square. I thought about how he used to say, every time I left after Sunday visits, "You just keep being exactly who you are." He said it like it was the most important advice in the world. It was, I just did not understand it yet. Now here is the final thing I want to say, not about Marcus, not about the money, about what happened when the truth came out and the family had to reckon with it. Families are complicated. People believe what is easiest to believe. People choose the loudest voice in the room. People do not want conflict, so they choose the story that requires the least confrontation. My parents chose to believe Marcus not because they did not love me. They chose it because Marcus was confident and persuasive, and the alternative, that their son had done something terrible, was too painful to sit with. When the email went out and they read the letter and understood what had happened, they did not become different people overnight. My mom cried and apologized, but she was still the same woman who had always needed things to be peaceful more than she needed things to be honest. My dad was still the same quiet man who expressed love better through actions than words. But they tried. They made room for me again. Slowly, imperfectly, with the kind of awkwardness that comes from knowing you failed someone and not being fully sure how to repair it. I let them try, not because I was over it. I was not over it all at once. Healing does not happen all at once. It happens the way interest accrues. Slowly, steadily, mostly invisibly, until one day you look up and realize the number has grown into something significant. Marcus and I have spoken twice since that last phone call. Both times were at family events. Both times were brief and surface level. He is thinner than he used to be. He does not take up as much space in a room as he once did. I do not feel satisfaction at this. I feel nothing dramatic. Mostly I feel like I am looking at someone I once knew. Diane sent me a card about a year after the transplant. It was a simple card with a simple message. She said Marcus was recovering. She said she hoped I was well. She said she thought about me and about what I had done, showing up to get tested, even after everything. She said it meant something. She did not explain more than that. She did not need to. I still have that card. I keep it in a drawer, not because I need it, but because sometimes it is useful to have small reminders that people are capable of being better than their worst moments. Even the people who hurt you. Even the ones who caused you years of pain. Grandpa Robert understood all of this. He did not hate Marcus. He did not cut Marcus out. He simply loved me in a way that was stronger than whatever Marcus might try to do. That is the cleanest version of justice I can imagine. Not punishment. Not vengeance. Just a love that lasts long enough to outlast the harm. I am 33 years old now. I have a good job and a small apartment that feels like home. I have a few close friendships that I trust completely. I have a relationship with my parents that is honest and imperfect and real. I have money in the bank that my grandfather built carefully over decades and then quietly left for me to find. And every Sunday, I watch something old and slow on my television. Sometimes a Western. And I drink my coffee and I think about a man in 3 sweaters who drove a very old car and worked in a factory for 30 years and understood people better than almost anyone I have ever met. I think about how he sat across a chess board from me and let me win for a whole year before deciding I was ready to lose. Honestly, that was who he was, patient, quiet, always watching, always planning ahead. Here are the things I know now that I wish I had known at 23. The person who does the work of loving someone quietly almost always knows exactly what they are doing. Grandpa did not set up that trust by accident. He set it up because he had been watching and he had made a decision. Real love does not just show up at funerals with speeches. Real love shows up in documentation, in planning, in the quiet, unglamorous work of protecting the people you care about before you are gone. Being quiet is not losing. I went silent for years after what happened. I removed myself from a situation that was causing me pain. That was not weakness. That was protection. I needed distance to become the person who could handle the truth when it finally came. The silence was not surrender. It was a long, slow gathering of strength. When someone takes something from you and you cannot prove it yet, the most powerful thing you can do is build anyway. I built my life without the inheritance. I built it from scratch. And the life I built was mine in a way that $200,000 handed to me at 23 could never have been. I built it with my own hands and my own time, and it fit me perfectly. Legal documentation is the most boring and the most powerful gift you can give someone: an irrevocable trust, a signed letter, a clearly worded document witnessed by a notary. These things do not require a courtroom drama to work. They just sit quietly in a filing cabinet for years, and then one day they hand someone their life back. Grandpa understood this. He did not need to confront Marcus. He built something that no confrontation could ever touch. And the final thing, the one that is hardest to say but the most true: forgiving someone is not the same as letting them back in. I have not let Marcus fully back into my life. I do not think I will. But I have let go of the version of this story where I am defined forever by what he did to me. I am not the girl who got cheated out of her inheritance. I am not the grandchild who spent 10 years in exile. I am someone who was loved by a very good man, who built a life from very little, and who found a letter in a yellow kitchen on a Sunday afternoon that changed everything. That is the story I carry now. That is the one I choose. Grandpa Robert used to say something when I was young that I did not understand until now. He used to say, "The people who do things right never need to be loud about it." He said it about himself, about his savings, about his work, about his choices. He was the quietest, most careful, most powerful person I have ever known. And when he was gone, he was still there, in a filing cabinet, in an envelope, in a piece of paper that said, plainly and legally and irrevocably, that he had seen me, that he had trusted me, and that he had made sure I would be all right. I was all right, eventually, fully, in my own time. Because of him, because of Aunt Carol's yellow kitchen, because of a woman named Diane who called a stranger to beg for help and found something unexpected, because of the way Grandpa used to end every Sunday visit with the same 7 words: "You just keep being exactly who you are." I did, Grandpa, I did.